Can you give us your backstory? Can you introduce yourself?
Okay, talking of age, I'll be 90 in a few months, so that's about how old I am. On the stuff we're talking about today, that all of us involved in, I became accidentally almost involved in that long ago, in 1957. Let me explain what I'm talking about. Uh, there's been land degradation, biodiversity loss, desertification for over 10,000 years, 50,000 years in Australia, longer in northern texts and two. And then we got climate change emerging, and we had a lot of people denying it, some acknowledging it. But I think within the last few years, 2, 3 years, every sane scientist has acknowledged that humans are causing accelerated climate change. Now, that acknowledgement, the media, the public, most of you guys probably have missed the significance. That is an incredibly important acknowledgement for all of our lives, because you can never have two causes of the same problem. You can have many things influence a problem, but only one cause. And if we are causing it, then it means it's not being caused by fossil fuels or livestock. Now, if we are causing it, our resources cannot possibly cause it. The only thing that can possibly do so is how we manage our resources. So management is what is the problem. Nothing else. Nothing else. Now, accidentally, I'm not a wise guy, I'm not a well-educated guy. I was just a youngster in Africa, wanting to go into the army, not wanting to be a peacetime soldier, going into game department. I ended up as a 20-year-old in charge of a vast area, more than the size of the whole of the United Kingdom, and large wild areas, going to be future national parks. And I was in charge of them, and I was observing terrible soil erosion, biodiversity loss. I had Sir Frank Fraser-Darling, the world's top ecologist, stay with me for 6 weeks, camping with me every night, etc. And he had no solutions. And that point changed my life. I thought, well, I cannot spend a more meaningful life than to try to solve this problem. Now, that same national parks degradation that I was seeing in Africa in 1950s, you can see in national parks in New Mexico, Utah, California, etc. Today, they are some of the worst examples, worse even than other government lands and ranches. Now, you cannot possibly blame corporate greed, poaching, corruption, chemicals, colonialism, racism. I'm just mentioning some of the things I've heard scientists blaming. You can go through everything you can imagine, and at the end of the day, it's due to professional management. That's just what Jonathan started talking to you about, which was lovely. I loved his talk. Now, so by accident, circumstances, I was working on this problem 65 years before scientists who today still aren't working on the problem. So that's my introduction. So my take on things will be very, very different. And I really think what you said, Dave, about appealing to us all, just to not get our egos in the knot, not get angry, just listen to each other. I love that. I will be publishing shortly a memo of that time, and my main point in that is to point out that nobody is to blame for what is happening. I don't want to get into the blame game at all, and I point out that the way to solve these problems together, all of us together, could never ever been discovered by one person. Not me, not anybody else in the world. Could never have been discovered by any university, could never have been discovered in any one country in the world, could never have been discovered at any time in history. The way to solve the problem emerged from unique circumstances at that period of time when I began to work on the problem. Dying empire, dying colonialism, winds of change, civil war, tracking army, politics, everything. So the memoir will be about how it came about that we learned what was causing the problem and how we can solve it together. So I just look forward to a really nice discussion on that. And I would like to thank you enormously, Dave, for what you've started here. Many of you will not realize that when Jonathan was talking, he said something about when noisy scientists speak up, they get destroyed. That was very true. It's happened throughout history. And for your interest, the organization that got that done was your organization. In other words, we were so far ahead in the 1980s in this country, and the Society of Range Management and Professor at Texas A&M tried to get me deported from America because of the damage I was doing to America. And it's been 40 years since we've spoken. Thank you, Dave. We're starting to speak together again. Thank you.
Our time here with you is limited, and the chance to ask you questions doesn't come along very often. So I'm going to go straight to questions and answers. This is a well-versed group. And I know I see all egos are checked at the door. We're good to go. I'm gonna start up here with somebody I know who wanted to say something.
Wow. Allan, I'm A.G. Smith. We met when Tommy Martin was worked on us, or was our facilitator at the ranch, and you spoke at the cowboy poetry. You spoke at the cowboy poetry in Elko, and from there we started an experiment at the ranch, and we've been at it for 30 years, and I want to thank you. It is absolutely amazing what we've been able to accomplish. And, you know, when we first started, everybody is from Missouri. Will this work here? And knowing that we wanted to do something, that we wanted good things to happen, I would never have thought we could be where we are today. We just did some photographing of the riparians and things, and it's phenomenal. It works. It works. And thank you very much from the bottom of my heart.
Well, thank you.
Good. Question here from our incoming president, Jeff Goodwin.
Hey, Allan. Jeff
Hi.
Goodwin. So I am the incoming SRM president, and I'm from Texas A&M, so don't shoot me twice.
All right.
So number one, you've got a full crowd here listening, and so first of all, thank you for coming and visiting with us. We really appreciate it. We want to have a great conversation with you. So I want to ask you. We've talked a lot about the ecological benefits of some of the strategies around regeneration. I feel like I often say that most of our problems have two legs, not four. And so from the social perspective, what do you think are the top two or three barriers or ways to get around potential barriers that a producer may have to try to change their thinking around this paradigm?
I answered that in a way in a 12-minute talk at COP26, where 3 people were invited from around the world to speak on regenerative agriculture. Vandana Shiva was one, I forget who the other was, and I was the third. And if you listen to that 12-minute talk, I said I don't intend to talk about agriculture because so many thousands of people know far more than I do about it. I want to talk about the cause of the problem. And in that, I talked about the cause of why we're even here, why we're discussing this problem, because nobody was doing that. And in it, I pointed out that the average rancher farm family can only do the best they can. That's all they can do, and that's what you guys are doing while the ship sinks. And the reason for that is because global finance is driving environmental destruction. So whatever you do, your ship is being sunk. So you can only do the best you can. Now, if we are going to address it, then we need to address that cause at scale so that we can all begin to get the ship afloat. But right as we are today, short answer to yours is you can only do the best you can, as I'm doing and everyone else is. But until we address the cause of the problem at scale, we are all going to go down.
Got a question coming this way. Thank you.
Hello there. Coming all the way from California here, but one of the comments that was said in this introduction is that there's a diversity of age here as well. And as someone who, I don't own land, I don't specifically manage land, but I have influence on people who manage land. At the moment, almost 100,000 acres. And I'm curious if you have tips to not necessarily encourage, but inspire producers and also the next generation of producers to see this light, to see the potential of addressing management in this context.
Well, again, I would encourage those young people to join groups like this. You heard a wonderful lot of knowledge today. I listen to everything because I'm always trying to learn, and just encourage them to do that because there's not much more you can do. But do you notice in the two talks this morning, and this is, I'm not being offensive or anything, but you notice we only talked about production. We didn't talk about management, and production isn't management. So you ask how to get them into better production practices. There's so many good people doing it. Gabe Brownie was mentioned, many others. There's over 600 regenerative agricultural organizations now, but not one of them, to my knowledge, is addressing the cause of the problem. So yes, encourage them to join, make better practices, do better practices. But at the end of the day, I hope we'll get us all together somewhere, sometime, and talk about the cause of the problem. I don't want to be mysterious, so let me explain that. When I was at the COP26 talk, when I said I wouldn't talk about agriculture because there were so many people knowing far more than me talking about it, I had nothing to add. And I talked about the cause, and I said, at this conference, and it's the same at every conference virtually like that, I said, you're going to have a large group of people who are talking about small farmers producing food, milk, cheese, wine, whatever food, producing that from nature based on the biological sciences. And that's what most of you are trying to do. That's what your speakers were talking about, etc. Now that's about, I don't know, but I'm going to say 1% of the world. Now you've got the rest of the people at these big conferences, and what are they talking about? They're talking about corporations producing the food based on chemistry and technology. Now, it's a David and Goliath situation. They represent about 99% of the population, because just like guerrilla warfare, which I've been involved in for many years, if you're apathetic, you're supporting the other side. And most people are apathetic, therefore they're supporting the other side. And I said in that, what we need to do is to realize that we only manage three things. So everybody in the room looking at me, You tell me if I'm wrong, and I invite you to challenge me like anything. Tear me apart. I don't mind. But don't you manage your family, and you manage a farm, and you might manage a small organization or group in your community. And the very first thing you have to do is to finance your family. If you go broke, you're out. Whether you're an environmental organization, a university, whatever, you're managing people, and you're managing an institution now, and you have to finance it. It doesn't matter if you're a political party, farmer, same. And then you're going to manage nature to produce beef, milk, wine, cheese, timber, everything, music, art, literature, bonds, computers. We're all doing the same thing, whether you're a farmer or not. All humans are only managing three things. And you see, we didn't talk about that today. That's in my textbook.
Dave, we have one back here.
Mr. Allan, first of all, it's an honor to speak to you. You've been a huge inspiration in my life. When I started fully ranching, I was 16. And I remember reading, about the Savory method, and it was pretty much, the use of wire fence. I think there was a misconception amongst Mexican producers back in the day. But these past 10 years, 5 years, the most I've seen a lot of evolution in a thought, because I believe the holistic approach and what you speak in your book is more of a thought, a practice of living than a method of production. So what could you say to young people like me, young father, to daughters, that we want to see the light, at the end of the tunnel, and we want to be part of that contribution to restore the capacity of our grasslands and to protect our economy, to root our people and our values. So just a message of hope or whatever you want to share with us, it'll be very, very appreciated. And thank you, everybody, for the time.
Who's asking me?
My name is Bildo Sarabia. I'm a rancher from Durango, Mexico.
Okay, thank you. Yes, now, if you, I don't know quite where to start, but if you look at what we're talking about, and you mentioned there and others, land is not manageable, right? So really, my book was about managing humans, managing our lives. All of us manage our lives. It's the first thing we do. Then we have to finance our lives, farmer or whatever, as I said. And then we are going to manage nature to produce beef, food, whatever. Now, you're producing beef. What you're managing is nature. Crops, you're producing food. Timber, agriculture is the production of food and fiber from the world's land and water. So 6% of the planet is engaged in cropland. 6%, 94% of the planet is engaged in agriculture. And we need to take heed of that. If we look at the land alone, 20% is engaged in agriculture, 80% is oceans, but they're still engaged in agriculture. So when I went to Australia to a book signing, I was met by 300 farm families from every state except Tasmania. And what I liked most was a lot of people came and thanked me, for which I appreciated, but they never thanked me for saving their farm. They thanked me for saving their family. So managing holistically is about managing your family. You cannot manage land. Land is so tied to the culture of the people that you cannot manage it. And it is so tied to the economy, because the only economy that can sustain any city, any nation, comes from the photosynthetic process, as you're hearing today. And so as you have to manage people first and institutions, and then economy and nature, you see, as long as we're talking about managing land, we're going off track without meaning to.
Good afternoon, Mr. Savory. This is Brenda Simpson, and I had the distinct honor of eating breakfast with you at the Los Angeles Soil and Water Carbon Summit meeting about 10 years ago. And so this isn't a question, this is just a compliment. And that day, that conference, many of the World Health, soil health leaders were there, and NRCS was just starting kind of their kickoff with Ray Archuleta on soil health. And I got to go from New Mexico, so New Mexico was starting its soil health journey. And I just remember this at breakfast, that a lot of folks were talking to you about soil health concepts, and there was a lot of discussion. But at the end of breakfast, you asked me for my thoughts, and that has stuck with me since I met you 10 years ago, is that you were just very open-minded to hear all aspects and all opinions. And so I've waited 10 years to tell you that I'm very remorseful for not following up on your offer to come to Albuquerque and visit with you longer and more about this. But I will say that you're talking about family, and my daughter has picked up that torch and is doing a PhD in AMP grazing. So I just want to thank you for, the influence you've had on our discipline. And thank you for being here today.
Thank you. I would like to make some comments, but Dave, can I make a comment? When I was at university, all right, what they did, our professors, we were a very small university, and when we did anything, wrote a report, did a paper, anything that was at all off, shoddy, whatever, they tore into us, embarrassed the hell out of us in front of everybody. They never did it privately. And they absolutely tore us down. And by the end of 3 years, we'd got it. They were training us as scientists. And the point they were making is, do you notice we never, ever attacked your motive, never, ever attacked your character, your personality. We attacked your work. If you're going to be a scientist, you have to be open to your work being criticized. I mention that purely because in the framework of this discussion of us today, I'd just like to take up something that I provoke more thinking, and then you can ask me questions on it. But I really loved Jon's talk, and one of the questions he asked us, because science is the asking questions and answering them, and he said, how is it working? And I noted that now. He said, how is it working now when everything is being based on chemicals and experts? Now, I think all of us would say it wasn't working. I think we can say that. Now, as a scientist, Jon, I would immediately pose another question. And I'd say, well, why did you say, how's it working now? How about 10,000 years ago? Because if I look at the agriculture 10,000 years ago, there was no chemistry, there were no chemicals, there were no experts, but those farmers destroyed 20 civilizations. So do you see, as scientists, we need to go deeper. That's the work I'm doing, and that's what my textbook's about, but you had a copy, but it's in its 3rd edition, and I need to write the 4th one. I would just urge all of you to go to the source and help us build.
Any question back there?
Mr. Savory, my name is Jim Armendariz, and I'm a rancher in New Mexico and also a range specialist with NRCS. But you've got a really good YouTube video, I've watched it a few times, about the difference between science versus academia. And it's really, I struggle with that in my day-to-day job, with more and more academics every day, and less people observing science in the field and dismissing science for lack of a peer-reviewed paper, to quote, But anyway, if you could talk to the group about that, I think everybody needs to hear.
Okay, thank you for that. Now, Jon also mentioned this, his concerns about it, and I really heard that. I posed a question recently to a group of about 10, 15 people, some had PhDs, some master's degrees, etc. And I asked them 3 questions. And I said, what is the scientific method? They all answered instantly, correctly. I said, what is the peer review process? They all answered instantly, correctly. I then asked them, what is science? There was just stunned silence and they couldn't answer. And after half an hour of argument and discussion, I was able to tell them what science is. Yes, it's gone haywire because institutions are being, well, I don't want to get into that, Jon got into it. They're bought. Institutions have been prostituted. Anybody's for sale because once you form an organization or you have a family, the first thing you've got to do is finance it. And people are for sale. And institutions and political parties and universities and research establishments, they're all for sale today. That's why I say we've got to address the cause of the problem, because it addresses that.
I am also for sale, if anybody's asking.
He's not telling us how much. Hi, Mr. Savory. My name's Hector Menendez from South Dakota State University. So, little context here. My children, I have 5-year-old, 3-year-old, 1-year-old, and they waste a lot of food. And we have a composting bucket. And so my wife and I are like, wow, food's expensive. We observed feedback. And by the way, my specialty is systems thinking and system dynamics. So I'm always looking to close a feedback loop. So we observed this and we said, why don't we feed our kids whatever they want, but less at each time? And I really thought about applying that concept to rangelands, which is if we could transfer food waste to range as an exogenous input to restore whatever, benefit the soil health. And I know that's not viable in the infrastructure, but then I thought about the social responsibility of how my perception changed when I said, oh, I see this bucket filling with feed or filling with food that I'm wasting. So I can do something about that. So I think I wrote this grant. I wrote it in 3 days without sleeping, so I didn't get, FR didn't fund it, but I'm still convinced it's a good idea. Just to get people to have that feedback of, oh, I have a connection to the land, and that's where the food waste is stopping, but there's no connection back to the range from society. And just any comments to that, I'd love to hear it, and thank you for your time.
Yes, we need to connect back to society, but you said, I think, that you're a systems specialist, and was that correct?
Yes, sir. Through the MIT Sloan School of Business for Systems Thinking and System Dynamics. I'm probably a novice, but I have that training. Yep.
Okay, so if you're a system theorist, you know about wicked problems, etc. And if you read Eric Ashby's research, you know that some of what Jon was saying earlier about trying to provide data and facts and change opinion, or doing what you're saying to try to change public opinion, that's the only known way of change today, until you ultimately get government policies changing, before which you cannot solve this problem. So you try to do that, but you're a systems scientist, so you know about wicked problems. And one of the wicked problems of institutions is that it doesn't matter how many facts you provide. It doesn't matter how much data you provide. It doesn't matter how many trillions of dollars are wasted. It doesn't matter how many million people die. They do not change until public opinion shifts. So yes, you're trying to do it. But if you lead research, as I constantly try to do, that takes anywhere from 100 to 200 years. Now, I've been on this problem for 70 years so far, and I've changed 1 millimeter. So we can keep doing that, or you might want to look at that COP26 talk I gave, because I did suggest an alternative way that's never been tried before, but would give everyone a fighting chance and would stop us arguing and conflicting and get us working together. I think there are other ways of doing it. And then no, I think that's enough. If that's...
I think there's going to be some follow-up on that.
Hi, my name's Courtney Buchanan. I'm a student at the University of Wyoming. So 2026 has been designated as the International Year of Rangelands and Pastoralists. And I know in the talks or the discussion we've been having earlier, we've talked about how this is a giant global issue, as well as the fact that a lot of folks aren't directly involved in our food system or specifically rangelands. So how would you suggest using that international year as a platform to work towards solving some of these giant issues that we're facing?
I would make the point that, I try to make the point that the rangelands are critical. That's why the Savory Institute focuses on the grasslands of the world in its strategy, because that's where the whole population of the world will get the highest benefits. And others gave you figures today of carbon into the soil and things today that are very impressive. So that's why we focus there. But now, if you use that rangelands and pastoralists, then again, you have to come down to addressing the cause of the problem, because in the 2013 TED Talk that I gave, that's actually gone to about 9 million people now, right? It carries disclaimers from academics, etc. But in that, I pointed out that when I realized in the 1960s that it was impossible to reverse global desertification with fire and technology, as all the universities and range science profession believed, and that we had to do it with livestock, I talked in that about how were we to do it, because every way that humans have ever run livestock in over 10,000 years had led to biodiversity loss, and in the seasonal rainfall environments to desertification. Now, Rosanne had studied rotational grazing in Europe for 200 years. They lost biodiversity. So what were we to do? Nobody in the world knew how to run livestock. So what I then did was to revert to 1,000 years of military experience in planning, immediately planning in battlefield conditions, where everything had changed, turned upside down, you don't know what the hell's going on, how do you plan? And from that, I developed holistic planned grazing process. Now, when doing that, I recognized that all the pastoralists of the world, and I talked about it in the TED Talk, the land was still turning to desert. With all their mob grazing and high intensity grazing, rotational grazing, doesn't matter what you do, it was still doing that. And but not in the humid environments of the world, where it's impossible to create millions of hectares of 90% bare ground between soil. You can't do it. You can use chemicals, everything. Fire, nature just fills it up. Nature fills the vacuum all the time. So even with pastoralists, we were getting desertification. It's still continuing. I work with them in Africa and Afghanistan, I have, in Yemen and so on, Pakistan. And then we looked at modern range science, and that accelerated desertification. And I talked about that. So we have got one way that we know works, and it's much simpler than anything you were discussing this morning, even that Alex was discussing, and that's just holistic planned grazing process. That solves almost all of the rancher problems, mixed farm problems. So I would urge you to have a look at that. But at that conference, it would be nice if you could use rangelands and pastoralists, but I don't believe it'll go anywhere unless you address the cause of the problem again. And remember, the cause of the problem is how humans manage their families, their economy, and produce food from nature. That's what we need to focus on. And I would bet that conference, unless somebody brings that about, we'll talk about production.
Hi, Alan. Martin Townsend from Northern Montana. Earlier, John had a point about needing 2.5 times more cows to meet the potential for regenerative practices in soils. I was wondering if you had thoughts on that number or a discussion on that point.
In the spirit of what I said earlier about not I'm not being critical of John, because I loved his talk and I learned from it. He did define regenerative farming, I believe I'm correct, and I wrote it down. And when I look at that definition of regenerative farming ranching, it is exactly what people would have done 10,000 years ago. So again, I come to, we've got to go deeper. All of us, I appeal to us to just keep talking. We won't do it today, but keep talking, keep talking. We've got to go deeper. Now, with requiring more, there's no specified limit or anything. We did what was called an advanced project. The first international trial, the charter trials, was done in Rhodesia. And at the same time as that was going on, I got two companies to give me permission to shoot ahead of everything. And we called them advanced projects. We did not call them trials. Because if we called them trials and they failed, all my critics would say, there you are, it failed. So we called them advanced projects because we were trying to cause failure. We were trying to cause failure. And for the biggest one, in 8-inch rainfall, which could be as low as 4-inch rainfall, we picked the worst land in the country, worse than anything you were shown on slides today. We could not find a single perennial grass in over 100 miles drive. And Lloyd Swift, the head of the range science team from America, proclaimed the land technically beyond reclamation. Now, I got the company to give me 4,000 acres of that land and to take no risk on me because they wanted me to advise on over 1 million acres with 60,000 cows. And I said, I don't want you to take any risk on me because everybody in the world says I'm wrong. So what I'd like to do on this 4,000 acres, give me your hardest cattle to run, first calving heifers. And I said, what's the stocking rate? They told me. And I said, right, we'll double it immediately in the dry season. We doubled it immediately and I proved wrong. We had to go to 3 times. We did nothing but holistic plan grazing, nothing, only that. Now, that ran for 8 years. It became solid perennial grassland, no reseeding, nothing done except that. Right, so we could not cause it to fail. And then that was converted to some of what you're talking about today, watching the cows, letting the cows tell you when to work. I was driven into exile and it was 4 years till I could get back. And after 8 years of being unable to cause failure, in 4 years, it was totally restocked. It was back to bare ground. And the same managers managed it. And I said, what did you do? And they were honest. They said, thank God you buggered off. Because I always nagged them. And there was an airstrip nearby that I would land on and make sure the planning was done. And so I said, okay, after that, what did you do? They said, we've just done what we'd always done. We kept moving them every day or so. We watched the cattle, we watched the grass. It collapsed completely. Now, nothing you're doing today will collapse because you weren't pushing it as we were. We were trying to push this to cause failure. So I just give you that encouraging thing. If you understand the holistic plan grazing, which is simpler than anything you've been talking about today, you will find it incredibly difficult to cause failure. And it'll be simpler than what you're doing today.
Hi there, my name is Titus Shadig. You talked a little bit about managing your family and your finances before you even think about what you're going to produce. And I'd like to pick your brain and ask you, what steps would you go about, or what advice do you have somebody for managing their family and finances before they start thinking about production? What, I guess, what steps in that area of your life would you give advice on?
Okay, let me try and take that, and let me take 2 scenarios. Let me take, it's a ranch family, and it's in Southern California, Chaparral or Chihuahua Desert and Chaparral country, or any of the stuff you've shown today. And another is a ranch family in Brazil, in the Amazon forest, and they're both going to start. Now, if they start with mob grazing, adaptive management grazing, high intensity grazing, any one of the 15 derivatives of my work, if they start with any of that, I wouldn't know where to go. I wouldn't know where to go. Now, if they started with holistic land grazing, the first step is in the word holistic. They would use this holistic framework, and the very first step would be to look at how they want their lives to be, etc., what the environment has to be like hundreds of years from now to sustain that. And then they'd look at the possibilities, and they might consider using cattle or sheep or goats, livestock. And the first step in making the family profitable, etc., is to look at that. Now, when they do, using the holistic framework, they would check that, and they would realize that if they do, they're going to bankrupt the family, damage the nation, damage the economy. It should be illegal. So they would withdraw. That would be the first thing they do with holistic land grazing. It's just not do it. Realize that it's going to bankrupt their family. Now, if they were in the Arizona or the Chihuahua Desert, etc., the first thing they would do is realize we've got to use livestock, not optional, because fire and technology can't do anything that Alex was showing you. Only livestock can do what he was showing you. There's nothing in the world can do it except livestock today. So you would know that, and then you would say, well, how do we do it? And you'd be looking at the economic side of it. Now, most people doing any of the many derivations of my work, the first thing they start to do is to put in is to put in fences, divisions of land, etc. Now, this morning it was mentioned what are the two biggest problems in ranching, and I noticed the biggest problem wasn't mentioned. The biggest problem is overcapitalization. So this family, if they're doing holistic land grazing, would realize that, oh my God, I don't want to put in fencing. The first thing I have to do is just buy more cattle. Now, if I haven't got money to buy more cattle, I just need to talk to a friend and lease the grazing, but under my management. In other words, use human creativity to start generating money, because every ranch I've looked at in the world, every ranch was overcapitalized. So the first thing you need to do is not put in fencing. So holistic land grazing, that would come out. So I've shown this is a difference.
Along those same lines, and this is kind of a tough question to ask, so I'm asking it in all earnestness. If financing the family is fundamental to all this, how have subsidies affected the outcome of our agriculture and our grazing? And if it's negative, are there other places that are doing something different?
Subsidies are negative, I can tell you that. But it's not just my view. When I came to the United States as an exile, very far-sighted people in what's now the NRCS, was then the SCS, Don Sylvester, Ray Margo, they, after negotiations and so on, commissioned me to put 2,000 officials through training in a holistic framework that I was known to be developing. And they, not me, we together, we developed the holistic framework to what it is today. And they made a statement, because one of the things you can do is analyze any policy and develop policies. And they made a statement that has never been challenged. And it's in my textbook today. One of you's got a copy in the room, John has. And the most significant statement in that whole book is, I'll quote it for you: "We now recognize that unsound resource management is universal in the United States." That came from 2,000 people. All the main land-grant universities and government agencies were able to make that statement after a week of training on what you're calling holistic land grazing. Okay, that's telling you all subsidies are unsound. That's part of what's causing the problem, how government policies are developed. Now, the one gentleman who works with system science from MIT, if you know about wicked problems, so the SCS or the NRCS did that. We trained 2,000 people. The agreement with government was if they liked it, the government would take over my work and we'd have one training entity in America because they considered it vital to the future of the United States. At the end of the 2 years of training, Forest Service alone was asking us to train 18,000 Forest Service personnel. And because institutions are how we manage at scale, the NRCS banned all future training. And we've been 40 years set back. You see, we're managing institutions, and through them, they have to finance themselves. And we're managing political parties, they have to finance themselves. And then we're managing nature to produce food. I'm serious, you have to address the cause. And it's far simpler than you imagine.
Better? There we go. Apparently I shut it off. My name is Chris Schocksnyder. I just want to first express my gratitude for your flexibility to be here with us today. I know we've spent a lot of time trying to make that work and figure it out, and so I'm really happy that we were able to find a way to make that happen. The question that I have is, in our current age, we have a time frame where information can be transported from people to people far faster than it has ever been in our history. What are some of the opportunities and what are some of the challenges that you see with that transfer of information at the speed that we have, both positive and negative?
I don't know the answer to that. All I know is that we're evolving all the time as a species, and our technology is evolving us. Our cell phones are changing our families, they're changing relationships, they're leading to suicide problems, all sorts of things. One of the points I've made, or trying to make in the memoir, is that all animals need habitat. You can survive longer without water and without food than you can without habitat. If you look at an Eskimo, you look at a San Bushman in Africa, or you look at a tribe in South American jungle, they're the same human species. They look totally different. Why? Because of their habitat. And if you just, with all the massive information that's coming, there's also disinformation. So it's getting very, very confusing. But if you look at the situation today, you and I, all of you in the room, have got an amazing amount of plastic in our brains. Now that means the plastic is in the babies, it's in the fetus, it's in the blood, and we are evolving as we talk. Now, so it again becomes very serious if we start addressing the cause of this, and part of the blessing will be our ability to communicate around the world rapidly. But part of the problem is criminals use it, political parties use it, people disinformation use it, corporations use it. So somehow, again, we're going to have to look at policy, because it's both a blessing and a curse, and I don't know which way it's going, unless we look at policy beyond politics.
Allan, I want to thank you for your time with this Q&A. We're going to move it. Can we give him a round of applause? Thank you. We're going to change things up now to a panel discussion with our three presenters, as well as four producers, some mostly local to the west anyway. One of the new folks introduce themselves briefly.
Less than a minute. That's going to be a tough one for me. Keith Nance, founder and owner of Nexus Beef, based out of Prineville, Oregon. Also have a ownership in a USDA processing facility about an hour west of here. We also have a stalker intensive grazing program. We've had 2 years of R&D and trials here just outside of Spokane and Cheney on a normal crop system or be a row crop system. We are then in grazing, intensively grazing cover crops. Pretty broad scope study as far as soil and animal performance in that. Also have a feed yard down in Central Oregon and a sizable high desert cow-calf operation.
Yes, good morning, and thank you, Alan, for being here. My name's Rex Harder. We have a 100-year-old started out as a cow-calf ranch. We have grown into keeping the yearlings around, and we are now a member of Country Natural Beef, and where we own the product from ranch to table, so to speak. So, and we have a lot of the same goals that are out there before. Know your finance and your genetics, and always keep your people and your animals safe.
I'm A.G. Smith. We ranch in northeastern Nevada, in sort of the higher precipitation zone of Nevada. Cow-calf operation. We started doing holistic management 30 years ago, and we just had a sort of a review of that whole process, and it's been pretty amazing at how successful it's been. And anyway.
Hello, my name is Molly Linville. Was raised on a fifth generation wheat and barley farm that's 40 miles west of here, and became a wildlife biologist for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And I don't know, 12 years into that or so, my father-in-law passed away very quickly and left us, my husband and myself, a 6,000 acre cattle ranch near Wenatchee. And we were both federal workers at the time, and we had this stuff called sick leave and all the bells and whistles, and we had to decide overnight if we were going to become cattle ranchers because he had never told us he was leaving us the ranch, and so it was a surprise. And my husband was a resounding no way in heck, and I was a resounding absolutely. And so at the time when I was working for U.S. Fish, I was managing wildlife refuges in arid shrub steppe habitat. And the ranch is also in arid shrub steppe habitat. And when I was with U.S. Fish, we'd have a fire, it would burn all the refuges, we'd replant. It was sort of rinse, repeat. And we never asked ourselves, is what we were doing working? How does the land look afterwards? And when I moved to the ranch, had been continuously grazed for over 100 years, and it was beautiful and intact. And I had to ask myself, what's the difference between those wildlife refuges and the ranch? And grazing was the difference. And I needed to know more because I was a scientist. And so I found Mr. Savory's work, and it was like the light bulb went off in my head. And so managing regeneratively has been a journey. And I'm sitting here sort of dumbfounded hearing about Mr. Savory talking about the family dynamic, because I just about demolished my marriage getting that ranch up and running again. And now I know why. So regeneration continues.
Thanks. This came in from Facebook during John's presentation, and I'll put it to John, but I'd like the panel to discuss it at your leisure. In daily life and in science, we often start with the wrong questions, exclamation mark. How can we guide ourselves to the questions that will advance our food system? And I would add beyond food system, just advance ourselves.
That's a deep question. I think fundamentally it comes down to what Alan was saying, and I tried to indicate in the talk, You know, it's about family, it's about connection to the natural world, it's about community. And food is such an important part of that whole dynamic and relationships and trust. And it's an important tool that we can use. So I guess that those would be some really fundamental things for us to focus on. And I'll hand the mic to somebody else.
Alan, you're also part of this conversation too, so chime in whenever you want. It looks like Rex is about to.
Well,
Go ahead,
I
Rex.
I can be quick. I think it's know your customer and collaborate with your customer as to what they want. Our theory on the ranch is we're raising the food for them, not for us. And you know, there's health issues in there. The customers need education just like we do. So.
I'd second that motion. I think one of the biggest things we miss as cattle ranchers, I know I'm guilty of it, is that we keep a pretty narrow focus on what we're doing on the ranch and what we're used to in our lifestyle. That's about 180 degrees opposite of what the customer's really looking at and what's important to them. And so we have to open our eyes a little bit and say, well, what is the customer asking for? And again, back to what John said, it's very communal, right? We as a community, sometimes we look at it's just our small little community in a rural town, but really we're global, right? That's our community. And so we had to listen to each other,
Being a cattle rancher on public lands, there was a gentleman by the name of Ted Cook wrote a paper just really recently, and he was the director of the Fish and Wildlife Service in Nevada. And when I first met him, he wasn't very appreciative or didn't look very favorably upon grazing. And one of the things that he wrote in this book, in how do you, we've talked to different ways today, how do you get that paradigm to change and people to change? And one of the things that he said, which really rang true to me, is that he said, and Alejandro, you sort of hit upon it just a little bit. If the only thing that you're going to create income for your family and for your business is beef, then that is what you've got to put most of your priority and your emphasis is on raising beef. If we can create an incentive type of a program where you could get paid for these ecosystem services, where you could get paid for having good land, good riparians, then you would have another option. You would have beef, plus you could make money off your land or your carbon, many different opportunities there. But one of the things he says, until the public, the agencies that realize that ranchers are going to concentrate on what they are raising their family on, and until people realize that how valuable and that what they're doing on the land, it has a value, and paying them for it, it's going to be very difficult to make changes. And so anyway, I thought that was fairly interesting.
For the four who just joined us, I know most of you and appreciate your operations. What's been your biggest challenges in this new direction that's going on in your management, in your changes in management? What's been the biggest hurdle for you?
So I'm a first generation. I didn't grow up in this industry. It's always what I wanted to do. I was told very young that you're either born into it or you marry into it. And hopefully I've been proving folks wrong in that. I think the biggest challenge I have at this point is neighbors, right? This is a social shift that we're trying to make. And there's lots and lots of eyes. It's really easy, and I'm guilty of it, and probably most of us in this room are guilty of it. It's easy to look across the fence and tell them what they're doing wrong. It's really hard to look in the mirror. But when you got a lot of pressure around you from a social standpoint, it's really hard to make those changes. It's hard to be the outlier. It's hard to be the one saying, "Hey, you're stupid. What are you doing? Why are you doing that?" I think that's probably the biggest challenge a lot of folks are going to take. I mean, we're a proud bunch. We're individualistic in this industry, And so we have pride in what we want to do. And if people are telling you you're doing the wrong thing or you shouldn't do those things because it's not the way it's been done for the last 100 years, it's really hard to step out that gate. But I think we're all learning here that it's probably the right thing to do.
Well, in one respect, things haven't changed. People still eat 3 times a day, and they're all our customers. As you mentioned earlier, our beef can travel a long ways once it's in a truck or a plane. So I think the challenge, the people still want the product, and we need to do what the customer wants.
One of our biggest challenges is regulation, the government's regulation on grazing, and having them come along to take a look of more or this whole process that we've been talking about today.
Wait, that's all you have to say about regulation? That's it? No, time limits are off. You can go on now.
I would echo a lot of what's already been said, so I'm just going to add to it. My biggest challenge was I broke myself working, literally, and kind of figuratively too. And I don't like using terms like work-life balance because I don't want to be anywhere else and I don't want to be doing anything else. And it doesn't feel like work to me. But at the same time, I'm doing it never stops. I'm doing so much physical work. I busted a hip a couple years ago, and it was because I never rested. And I think that we need to change that frame of mind. I don't actually know how to do it, so don't ask me. But we shouldn't kill ourselves over staying in business and being in this industry. Part of the reason is because it's beyond my economic means to hire anybody. And I did try to hire somebody once, and I'm such an atrocious boss that they ran away crying and I never tried it again. But I was expecting them to work like I work. And so I think that there's a mind shift that we need to work on a bit in ranching.
To Alejandro, John, and Alan, are those common themes you have seen throughout your work? And do you have any advice on those situations? I really felt Keith's and regulation, but do you have any advice on those specific topics?
Alan, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, but you've got the mic. I was just waiting to see Alex or Alejandro. It tells me it's Alex or John what they felt on those things. I'll comment, but go ahead, you guys.
Well, for me at this point in time where I am, one of my biggest challenges is to scale this up, because I'm seeing how the certification, degradation. I feel sometimes that we are in a race, and we don't have enough champions, enough people to actually get this, turn this around. And then, as Alan has been teaching us for many years, it's not easy to work with institutions. You may have some few good people in institutions, but they're always concerned about going against the. But we're trying to spread the word, share, and we had the tangible results. But I feel there's still not enough for what we're experiencing right now as a, or you want to call it, right? Climate change or desertification, yeah.
I think it starts with values and morals and who it is that you want to be. And then regular self-assessment and regular self-forgiveness when you screw up. Within the regenerative movement, I'm probably going to piss somebody off. There was a lot of people that gained a lot of credibility very early on, and there's been such a movement to monetize this that we're really starting to lose face of who we are and what we were doing when we got into this whole thing. And so that self-assessment is really important, I think. I don't know.
I like that you added self-forgiveness in there too.
Yeah, boy, I've had to forgive myself a lot.
If I could comment now, Alex, I like what you said. You want to get it to scale. Now, have a look at the 12-minute talk I gave you. You'll get it. But there's two scales at which we manage. Remember, management is the problem. We manage at the human scale, and all of you in the panel and the audience are talking about managing at the human scale. Now, everything today at larger scale is done by an institution. The average person today can't make a toothbrush. It's made by a corporation. Okay, everything at scale is done that. So you've got to go to the institutional scale. And then I hear us talking about trying to change our neighbors, and you're trying to change the neighbors. The banana that leaves the bunch gets skinned. If you're different, they're going to criticize you. So you can keep trying to change the neighbors. And that's what Ashby talked about. So before that changes anything, it's going to take a very, very long time until it changes at scale. And then you're talking about regulations and the frustration of regulations. Where do regulations come from? They come from institutions and they come from laws. And where do laws come from? Laws come from policy. So you come all the way back in the circle to policy. So until we start talking management at scale, I would stake my life on it, and I wish some scientists in the world would tell me where I'm wrong. We will not solve this problem because it's common sense 101. If you've got a problem and you don't address the cause, your chance of solving it is zero. We are not even talking about the cause, so we are not going to solve it. So I love this discussion because if you can lead on and go deeper, then let's get into the cause of the problem, not today, at some time, because we're beginning to talk.
We've got a question from the audience here.
Hi, my name is Nikki Nimlos. I'm with the University of Wyoming, and I have a question for all of you. And I want to hear your thoughts as regenerative ranchers and researchers. And it feels appropriate because we are in Spokane. But a couple weeks ago, the state of Washington presented a bill that would impose a methane tax on cattle. And I'm curious to know your thoughts about all of that, because I don't think it's going to pass, but this isn't the first time we're going to see something like this in the beef industry. I think it's going to keep coming. So. Yep, those are my people. We talked a little bit earlier about somebody asked the question of, getting information at the speed of light. And this really addresses that. This is folks who believe what they read on Facebook. And one thing that I find challenging is everybody always wants to go after the low-hanging fruit, right? It's very easy to say, oh, cow burps and farts are causing 4 to 14% of the CO2 emissions. And so then clearly cows are the thing. And another piece that I really find frustrating is when you start peeling back the layers and you start going to who's actually paying for this, you will often find that it comes from somewhere like an animal rights activist, right? And they're well-heeled and they're well-funded, and they create a momentum for ridiculous legislation like this. And it's easy to get people to go along with that because it sounds like they're going to do something really big and all they have to do is vote for it. And so this is the time, I can't remember who said it, but this is the time where if you stay silent on something like this, then they're going to take that as your approval of it. And this is the time when you start pushing back on this ridiculousness. So I don't know if that actually answered your question.
Well, I think that demonstrates it's a good time to support your local agricultural organizations. And as I start with Country Natural Beef, the Washington Cattlemen's Association, the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, they field questions like this a lot. And did I leave out the Washington State Cattlemen? I should know. So anyway, you know, join your organization and get the message out there and push back.
I would second that. There's a lot of folks that aren't involved with your state and National Cattlemen's Association. There's multiple different ones depending on which way you lean in the industry and your politics. But get involved. I know that's easy to say when we all have 10,000 things to do on a daily basis just to try to keep up. I think one of the things that really points out to me is the disparity between where our food comes from and the people that are buying it. Right? We have, respectfully said, I call it the concrete jungle. I've been in downtown Portland and downtown Seattle at elementary schools that the kids still think that milk comes from the grocery store. They have no idea about where their food actually comes from. And then those same kids come through our education system into adults and they bring this stuff to the table. Well, they have zero basis. I agree with Molly. I think a lot of it is very, very financially driven. Unfortunately, follow the money, you'll find where the root cause is, as Allan talks about, getting down to the cause. It's about money, unfortunately. And when we have people that are educated or uneducated about where food comes from, it really starts to show that disparity. The other piece of this, I think that there's a lot of movement. We saw a lot through COVID. People really wanting to get back to the farm. They wanted to understand where the food comes from. I think that movement is continuing. There's lots of pop-ups. There's lots of folks doing online marketing using technology and some of those today to connect to their consumer. I think that we all, as groups, as organizations, and as people, need to continue that movement to connect those people back to where their food comes from and how it's produced. Hopefully, it will continue to stay those types of legislative activities.
I'd like to comment on this.
Please do.
If I can, sorry, it's hard when I don't have the mic and I don't want to interrupt people. But the question was the methane tax and what do we think about it? Go back to what I said. Unsound resource management is universal. Okay, so you can expect it. I was in Spain, I was in Germany talking to farmers some time ago, and I was in Hungary recently talking to farmers. And then I had to speak one evening to a group of young scientists and so on who are advising the Hungarian government apparently on climate change, etc. And a point I made to them, I will repeat here, I said, you know, while I've been going around here, my first time in Eastern Europe, where they'd been under Soviet occupation, I'd grown up in Second World War, I'd never truly understood what they'd suffered, and I sort of learned a great deal. But I said, I hear all of your farmers ridiculing the policies and the regulations and things that you had to follow from Soviet bureaucrats in Moscow. And I said, but while I've been going around here all these days with you, I hear your farmers ridiculing and so on the policies that are coming from your government because they're damaging your farms, damaging your economy, damaging your farms. Same in Germany. And I spoke to farmers and said, you know what you're doing is wrong. Why are you doing it? Subsidies. And I spoke in Spain. Why are you doing what you know is wrong? You're destroying Spain. You're destroying your families. European Union subsidies. So in Budapest, in Hungary, I said to these people then, I said, now what the hell is the difference? You were bitching and complaining and ridiculing when your regulations were coming from bureaucrats under the Soviets in Moscow. Now you're bitching, finding, and ridiculing, and your regulations are coming from bureaucrats, democratic bureaucrats in Belgium. It doesn't matter whether you're in Washington State or Utah or wherever. It's the same. We need to start looking at that.
Wow, I never thought I would be following Allan Savory on making comments. One of the things, we don't have a whole lot of tools in the toolbox anymore. And some way, and we're not really good at telling our story, the stories that are out there. And I think we need to tell the story of how important grazing and livestock are in solving this problem, because as it's been pointed out, if we have really good rangelands and grazing is going to be could be one of the keys to solving this. We need to have more stories like Alex and John pointing out what they've done. I mean, that how do you argue with that? It's just amazing when you look at the pictures and all of that. But we're only 1% of it. What was the percentage? Or not very many of us, including everybody that's in here.
I'm going to push back on that a little bit. I'm sick of having to tell our story. and the one thing that I've really learned is the states are very different on this topic. This sounds like it should be sort of one story, but like in a state like Montana, where you still have a larger rural space than you have an urban space, you can tell those stories and it will resonate with people. And not all, but a state like Washington, where most of the population is on the west side, they've already have their mind made up. They don't look around them. They can't identify with us because they don't see us in anything that they do or what's real to them. And so they're going to go with what they are comfortable with. And I can tell my story till I'm blue in the face. And I just feel like, you know, I think there's I think you do have to read your audience for where you live and determine whether that's the best use of your time. And I'm really just struck by how different it is in different areas, and to kind of get an understanding of that before you start singing the fight song.
Thank you. That was a pretty honest answer. Appreciate that, Molly. I got one right ahead of you.
Hello, I'm Burke Tykert. Alan, you and I go back a long, long ways. I agree with the last point that was just made. I've worked with a lot of farmers and ranchers over the last number of years, and I have found that until they're profitable, they can't do anything. I think that has to be the first thing that we strive for in helping each other manage farms or ranches. Now let's assume we can solve that problem. And then you can have quality of life. You can have wonderful landscape goals. But then, and I want to direct this question to Allan or to any of the rest of you, but then to get to that higher level objective, to have an effect on policy or laws, which are policy or become policy, how do we get from here to there? Let's assume we solve that, the family level profitability, so that we can then move the problem upward to have an effect on the broader population.
Look, it's good to hear your voice after so many years. If I could answer that one right away for you, because I think it's a fairly easy one to answer. You say the first thing you have to get is profitability. You know, because you've been involved for a long time, there's a paper published by Deb Steiner and her colleagues at Ohio State University. It's the first study done from ranchers from California across to Florida, who came to training with me personally. And she followed up with her co-workers, those ranchers, and they averaged 300% more profit. That's a published paper. At that same time, 600,000 farm families went broke, and suicide was the leading cause of death. You could not get more solid evidence of that. University, published paper, survey of ranchers who were practicing holistic plant grazing. We dropped it. Everybody dropped it. Ranchers dropped it. Cattlemen's organizations opposed. Not a single cattlemen's organization has yet supported me in America. Individuals have. Institutions are the opposition, but we have to have them. So now, how do you go from that, you said, to change? You ranchers, I'm talking to some of you on the panel, you're the only people that can do it rapidly from the population, and I've been talking about it for 40 years. So let me just repeat it again. You've got criticism. I spoke about ELCO, the Poets Association. I said the whole ranching Western culture is being killed. Western ranching will be remembered by athletes, paid athletes, riding in rodeos, not by cowboys any longer. It'll be remembered in cowboy poetry. We're destroying our ranching families. It hurts me. And I came here as an immigrant. Now, when you look at that, who can take a lead? The environmental organizations are criticizing ranchers, the vegans are criticizing ranchers, and the only people who can lead will not lead. And that is you cattlemen's leaders. Let me explain that to you. Institutions will not admit they're wrong, but individuals can. All right, so now, ranchers, one of you said it, we're individualistic, we're proud, we blah, 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 blah. Yes, that's a big asset and it's a big liability. All right, so what could a leader do? If I was the head of a cattlemen's organization, you know what I would do? I would break this whole thing. I would just simply stand up in public and talk as a human being with a family. And so I happen to head Cattlemen's Association of America or whatever. I admit our land is deteriorating. Stop denying it. Because if you look at the ranches in the country, you've got private ranches, and most ranches a small bit of deeded land and a large bit of leased land from an agency in the ranch. And if you look at it and just say, all of our land is deteriorating, ours is deteriorating, we admit it. The environmentalists are right. Just tell them they're right. And then say, but by the way, we notice your national parks, your research plots are worse. Why don't we get together and solve this instead of fighting? They cannot do it. They're institutions. You have ranchers who are individuals. For God's sake, lead to save your families.
I don't think anybody wants to follow that. I'm going to go to the next question.
So on this idea of scale, if you look at the cattle numbers in the United States, we had the lowest number of cattle in the U.S. since we've had since the 50s. Conversely, prices are pretty high. So, I mean, a bred cow is $3,000 plus. So from an economic perspective, plus in my state, half of the landowners don't live on the land; they're absentee. So I think there's a big opportunity for young producers to get engaged in custom grazing and things like that. So how do we scale in this current economic climate with the lowest cow herd numbers that we've had in the last 70 years? What are some innovative ways that y'all have seen for somebody to get into the game and help us scale the numbers to where we need them?
Is that especially for younger producers to get in? Any producer?
Well, I'd like to point out that cattle prices are finally in the ballpark, right? Like we've been sold a bill of goods for a really long time that beef is cheap to raise, and it's not. And so I'm a little tired of hearing about high cattle prices. They're they're just right cattle prices, I would say, or maybe a little low. I don't know. So I think that this is where that regenerative piece really comes in. My input costs are pretty low because my cattle are eating grass and drinking water, and that's about it. And I've got a mineral program too. And so but I just recently changed from a cow-calf operation to a custom grazing operation. And I am having no difficulty finding customers at all because cattle prices are just right or a little low. And so, young producers, this is not my idea. Everybody, they don't need to own land. Look, leasing land is where it's at, absolutely. See if you can swap labor for an old farmer, you know, in exchange for having the privilege of running cattle. Run somebody else's cattle and make your mistakes on somebody else's cattle. That's excellent advice, because you'll make a bunch of mistakes. Maybe start with corianders. I don't know. But don't like. I think we're sort of in a new era of we're not thinking that we have to own everything anymore. Like we're not trying to make the ranch bigger. We're not trying to have the biggest herd that we can. The other piece of advice is I made the decision right away not to take any loans. And that was so freaking hard. And now I'm actually making money. And I think it's because I started out without any loans.
Great question, Jeff. Thank you. I think that there's a thousand different ways to skin that cat. One of the great opportunities today is we have something called generational turnover. We're in the middle of it right now. I think there's millions of acres that are going to be turning over the next 20, 30 years, generationally. The opportunities that creates is absolutely huge. You know, setting up camp with somebody that's been in the industry for a long time, you got a lot of things to learn. Hopefully you have something to teach them too, and then create some opportunities. With the tool of social media we have today, there's ways to market beef. There's ways to get out there and cash rent and lease land, right? For those young folks in here that, or even anybody, I guess, it's really interesting to me how a lot of people go to school to learn ag production. We've grown up in it, or most people have grown up in it. Learn business, right? The most important thing that I have found is cash flow, right? If you want to build something, it's about cash flow. Cycle that cash as much as you can, and then you get coffers and you get some capital built up. And if you want to purchase land, fine, you don't have to. Understand business, understand how the business works, and you can really make some great opportunities happen for yourself.
That certainly is good advice. Thank you. I couldn't add much to that.
We have time for one last question.
I appreciate the opportunity and I appreciate the ability to, Dave, thanks, to close the questions out here, but no pressure. So I come from Wyoming and I work a lot across the Great Basin, and as an interdisciplinary person, you know, I'm often met at a table where we're often our own worst enemy as far as critics. When and you know, personally, I'm a habitat manager, I'm a range manager, I'm a wildlife manager, I'm a people manager. And when it comes together, we often have the moniker of no one speaks more harshly of wildlife people than range people, and vice versa. And when we look into agriculture production, different productions throw shots at each other. And so I wanted to throw it to the group, and I know a little about, you know, some of your operations, you know, at the table here. Do you have any recommendations or insight when it comes to the world that our critics are often adapting their process to attack us at a faster rate than we are? Do you have any insight that you could share of how we can work within this space to work together when we do know that those critics are moving fast?
That's a really interesting question. I think that one of the things we have to understand is we're social creatures. I tend to like to read a lot. One of my favorite books is Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey. If you haven't read it, I'd certainly recommend. I don't remember, it's habit 4 or 5 is first understand before being understood. The good Lord gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. And if you can step back and listen to your critics and listen to those folks that are throwing shots, you're going to understand them much better than just if you're trying to listen, but you're not really listening, you're forming your defense without listening. You're really not going to get anywhere. So if you can just step back And our first, as human creatures, our first step is I want to get defensive. I got to defend my position. But if you can open your ears a little bit and listen, then you're going to understand where they're coming from, and you can try to meet them in the middle and have some conversation. I think is the first great step.
Yes, that sounds really good. The other thing is in this age of social media and Super Bowl games and everything, you'll see a lot of the things that we see in the store and take for common have spent a lot of dollars on advertising. So given the social media influence that we have to get the message out there many more times than we would have thought we had to now, because people are overloaded with information. I have a family member in journalism, and it seems the attention span now is probably less than a minute. So you've got to get your message simple and get it out and keep it up.
One of the things that we have that has been pretty successful for us is that we have a collaborative team, and it's been 30 years now that we meet. And I'd never go back to doing business the other way. And everybody, all parties are invited, but if they don't come to the table, they don't really have grounds to stand on. And so it's been really successful for us.
Yeah, and we've been focusing on helping people that are interested in doing this, because one strategy that really did not work was to try to push everybody on the same direction, and people were not ready yet. So what we're trying to do, and what's been working well in Mexico, is to actually strengthen people that we know has potential, so we can actually find those next champions. And we don't waste time on discussions from the people are just, we don't know what the agenda is. So we actually are very focused and prioritize on who we support, because we're trying to replace ourselves, right? We don't want to make ourselves indispensable.
I think that, change is experiential oftentimes. And it as a scientist, I go out onto these places and I mean, I don't tell the staff whether we're on a regenerative farm or a conventional farm, right? But I mean, you can see them. I mean, more work gets done. They're happier. There's more laughing. I mean, it's just a totally different experience. And as a scientist, I mean, I understand, okay, I'm being inundated with my senses right now. The color and the reflectance is tripping, my optical sensors, and I'm smelling, the volatiles from the plants and the insects, and I'm hearing the birds, and all of this information goes into my head all at once, and my brain is taking all of it and saying, "You're happy." And I, as a scientist, I have to try to do that, right? I have to turn all of these numbers and convince somebody that's never experienced this before, when the easiest thing for me would just come on out and feel this with all of your senses and with your spirit. And if they did that, boy, it would make such an incredible difference.
We're coming. Oh, we have one more thing to say.
Is that all right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, amen to that. So wolves are actively recolonizing in the state of Washington. And so I work with cattle producers around wolves a lot. And as you can imagine, it's always a calm room and nobody's getting amped up, and it's great. So one thing that I've learned from that process is show up. When people have to look at another human being in the eyeballs, it is very hard for them to say the horrible things that they might say to you or about you online. And I have a friend, Jack Field, who works for Washington Feeders, and he says either show up at the table or be what's for dinner. And that's kind of true. And so seek out those opportunities it's so easy to testify to your legislature, or at least as in Washington State. You can just get online and you can talk right to your legislators when they're discussing a bill. Show them a face, humanize, and it's very hard for anyone to disregard someone when they're in the room. So show up.
Nice. We're coming to a close. We're gonna wrap up questions there. Before we get any final thoughts, I want to once again thank all of our sponsors, thank our speakers. Thank you all for coming. Pete has an announcement, and then we'll get some closing thoughts and wind this thing down.
Well, I'm going to give a few closing thoughts. First thing I want to remind everybody is tomorrow there's a Young Producers Forum. You know, I believe it starts at 1:20. I had it here. 1:23 p.m. Young Producers Forum. They were really helpful in us putting this event together. And now I'm going to speak on behalf of the SRM's Grazing Lands Coalition Committee. On behalf of the past chair and myself, we really appreciate all the effort that the Spokane planning team put together to make this event happen. I really would like to express my appreciation to Chris, to Dave, Tom Platt, and Richard. I don't know if Richard came in, but they were really the people that did the legwork and made this event happen. Mr. Savory and all the panel, I really appreciate you coming. We wanted to make an event that people could take home and put to work on the ground and not be tied up in scientific papers and did I really understand what I said? But so thank you guys. Thank you for doing all this. And really, thanks everybody for showing up. It blew my mind to have this type of a response. So thank you.
Yeah. Can I get Chris and Tom to stand up too? And Richard, if he's here. There's Tom, Chris, Cason's back there somewhere. Thanks, guys.
We were notified by our SRM president that out of all the walking that he's done around today, this has by far been the largest attended audience in the whole meeting for the whole duration of this event. So thank you guys for being here. We really appreciate that. And especially to all of you up here, I really appreciate that you guys were here to do this for us.
Allan, will you take us out with your closing thoughts?
I would appeal to you to not stop at this, not treat this as just an event at the beginning of a process. As I said to you, it's been 40 years since the Society of Range Management and Texas A&M tried to get me deported for the damage I was doing to America. Let's keep talking. You started us talking. I would just appeal to you, treat it as a process, and let's keep talking to Savory Institute, myself. There's so much we can do together. If we keep on as we are, there's so little that will happen. No ship will sink.
Thank you very much. I'm going to direct everybody back down to registration. There's bars and food and all the fun evening stuff. To where? To trade show. Pass registration on to trade show. Go enjoy yourself. Thanks everybody for coming out. Hit up Young Producers tomorrow. And to see these videos, it'll be coming to you at Good Grazing Makes Sense. So keep an eye out for those if you want to rewatch it.